Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for joining me again here today. This is our fourth webcast together, and if you're like me, well then you're in desperate need of a haircut. If you're attending on Zoom, you can submit a question at any time via the Q&A button. And if you are on YouTube, then thanks for joining. There is a chat function there, and we'll get to that at the Q&A time. So I just need to lower my speakers there for a second. So my virtual background today is the Rampart Casino and their sportsbook. If you've ever been there, it's an underrated sportsbook. It really is. They have the same lines as South Point, but they're always less crowded. It's a very nice place to watch a game without that much commotion going on around you. And this photo is courtesy of Mark Meltzer. He's Meltz Vegas on Twitter. That's MELTZ Vegas on Twitter. And he's a pretty good follow about everything going on in Vegas. So in the weeks past, we've talked about overcoming the house edge in sports betting and how hard it is. And that the most frustrating part is that even when you have an edge, it takes a long time to get into the long run. If you have an edge at the casino playing blackjack, maybe you're counting cards, for instance, you can expect to be making 70 plus bets an hour. And even if your edge is small, over time, the law of large numbers allows everything to work in your favor, and you reach a point where it's statistically unlikely that you'll lose money. In sports betting, we might make only 4 to 5 bets a day, and getting into the statistical long run is sometimes nearly impossible. So one thing I've always struggled with is the amount of time and effort it takes to place just one bet. I mean, I could comb over every game on the schedule, and it would take forever to find the certain gems that happen, each day. And then when I do that and do my analysis, I could be spending untold hours going over my handicapping technique, as well as maybe watching the game and looking for the right line. If you add it all up, it works out to be, maybe 9 or 10 hours you would spend in just one day trying to be an effective sports bettor. And, quite frankly, this is more than most Americans spend at their day job. And for a lot of you that are watching, sports betting is a side hustle. It's not your sole source of income. So that just doesn't make sense, right? So that's why I think you need this, because something's got to give in that situation. And too often people are choosing the wrong path. Here's something that not many people want to hear is sports betting is really an inefficient use of your time and money. Remember when I said in the first webcast that you need to find balance during this downtime? Well, I firmly believe you need to find balance even when sports return to our daily lives. You need to make betting on sports work for you, and don't let it control your daily routine. I firmly believe that sports betting is a great activity to pursue, and if you have a passion for it, it's a wonderful hobby, and I believe there are many different ways to become a profitable sports bettor. However, it can really be a struggle to not let it control your life. So that's why I wanted to do this topic. I think anyone can find ways to be more efficient in how they approach sports betting. After all, winning at sports betting is all about overcoming inefficiencies in the market by using efficient resources and techniques. So we've all heard the phrase, work smarter, not harder. I had a boss back when I was in my 20s who was very fond of using it. It often came up during annual performance reviews. So I set out to come up with ways to which to apply it to sports betting. Now, I by no means have mastered this. Sports betting takes up a large portion of my time. And this downturn has actually made me realize that, since I haven't been betting. I actually asked a few of my professional betting friends this week for their input, because this is something that I don't think I've mastered yet. So what follows is a quick and effective list that I think anyone can use to improve their approach to sports betting. So let's begin. The first way to work smarter and not harder is to look ahead. Very simple exercise here. Don't wait until the day of game to find angles for what you want to wager on. This is like going Christmas shopping with no idea of who you're buying for or what they want. You'll wander aimlessly around the mall this way. Trust me, I do it every year. You need to have a plan. So having a plan is a big part of taking this seriously, and it's a cornerstone that all successful professional bettors seem to have in common. Making a plan for yourself is an exercise that will give you direction and set goals. This will help you be more focused and driven. Each year, I make a business plan for myself. I discuss what sports I want to bet on, what improvements I need to make up to keep up with the market, and how much revenue I'm looking to derive from it. We can talk about the business of being a professional gambler another time, but I think having a plan is the most key aspect of conducting yourself professionally. Maybe an annual plan is far too big for you. What about a weekly plan? Take some time each Sunday night to look ahead and see what time and energy you can budget to sports betting that week. You'll make more efficient use of your time. Now, looking ahead is also a good way to discover angles. For instance, before the 2018 season, the NBA occasionally had scheduling instances where a team would play 4 games in 5 nights. If their opponent came in slightly rested for that 4th game in 5 nights, then there was a significant advantage for that opponent over this team that's running on fumes. One could go through the NBA schedule far before the NBA season and pick out the spots where teams were going to be at a disadvantage due to scheduling quirks. Now, I'm not saying the market wasn't adapting to this information, but there was often still significant line movement on the day of game for these games. And identifying them ahead of time was advantageous. So in the past, I've used a physical day planner calendar where I take notes of certain dates. They're going to have certain instances where teams are going to be at a disadvantage due to scheduling quirks. This year, actually, I transitioned to using Google Calendar, and I have it send me a reminder the day before these scheduling quirks, so I can kind of pay attention to overnight line movements and day of game line movements. And it's worked out pretty well. If you're not walking through the schedule of the sport that you're interested in weeks or months in advance, you really should do so. In Major League Baseball, you can identify day games after night games where a starting catcher or a star player is likely to be rested. In the NHL, you can identify situations where a backup goalie is more likely to get the start. With the NFL, you should often pay attention to not only the scheduling, but also stat splits for the goalies. The NHL seems to read into the variance of goaltenders more than any other sport I've seen. A goalie home road split gets factored in. The goalie's historical performance against certain teams is factored into whether they decide to give the starting goalie or the backup goalie the nod for that game. And all of this is coming just from looking ahead, right? You notice that you don't need any programming language knowledge. You don't need heavy duty math here. It's all a good example of qualitative analysis. So when you're handicapping on qualitative analysis, you're using non-numerical information. You know, there's not any math involved here. We hear a lot about quantitative analysis, and but this is a good opportunity to use qualitative analysis, and it's a good example of how it can be used effectively without ever getting deep into the weeds of math or crunching numbers. So that brings us to our next point. You can work smarter by automating many of your tasks. Case in point, you could walk the schedule for every NBA team, as I just suggested, or you could dump that schedule into some kind of data frame like Excel and write a quick script to identify all the times that a team plays 3 times in 4 nights and how rested their opponent is in those games. That's even easier than it seems. Excel has functions to determine the number of days between 2 dates, and expertise is really not needed for this. So automation is a key component of being a successful sports bettor. In fact, when I reached out to my friends, this was the topic they had the most feedback on. You can read the quotes on the screen there from 2 highly successful sports bettors, Rufus Peabody and Spanky. Automation is wide-ranging, and you can get very creative with it. You can use it to be prepared with a list of lines to handicap. You can use it to process the final scores at night and grade your wagers. As Rufus says, You can use it for any task where intuition or expertise is not needed. The more you automate and the sooner you automate, the more time savings you have during the course of a season. In fact, I'd contend that the more you automate and the more you do so, the more your lifetime expected profit increases. If you can free up bandwidth for other projects, you can realize other revenue streams. I've seen examples of automation that blow my mind. And these aren't just bots that are placing wagers automatically, but rather information gatherers who are more efficient at finding and processing relevant information than any human could possibly be. Now, don't feel like you need to learn a coding language to handle your automation. The earliest automation I ever used was the web query function of Excel. It required almost zero coding. And since then, Microsoft has added an add-on they call Power Query, which is far more powerful and versatile than web query ever was. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Excel, but as I've mentioned in an earlier webcast, it has a fairly easy learning curve. Everyone is familiar with it in some way, and it's greatly lowered the barrier to entry for a lot of sports bettors. If you don't use Excel, Google Sheets has much of the same functionality as Excel, and it's a bit more portable. So if you don't have access to Excel, you definitely have access to Google Sheets. Another non-programming option to use for automation is Google Alerts. Basically, Google Alerts scour the web and find mention of whatever you tell it to look for: player information, team news, etc. There are a lot of ways Google Alerts can help you reduce the time you spend looking for information for handicapping purposes. Google Alerts can be an overwhelming product to get a handle on, but if you use it, you can really get a jump on a lot of sharp bettors to some solid information. It's worth noting that creativity can pay when it comes to automation. So there are a lot of bettors out there that might find your automation extremely valuable to what they do. You can use automation tools as a currency to buy your way into other relationships and other plays. It's a useful product for trade because it doesn't take away from any angle you might have. It just automates the information and enhances it. So you can be good at automation and maybe not so good at sports betting, but this is a way to possibly connect and profit from relations with other bettors. Every sports bettor needs automation to do what they do. And if you can master automation, you can become a very valuable resource to someone. So the next way you could work smarter, not harder, is something I like to call shorten the game. It comes from a concept in sports. If you're coaching and you get the lead, you want to shorten the game. In football, you run the ball more so the clock stops less. In basketball, you utilize more of the 24-second clock before you attempt a shot. Well, it has an application in sports betting in combating variance. There are many variables that come into play when you handicap any sport. Let's take, for instance, Major League Baseball. You need to factor the lineups, the starting pitchers, the bullpen, the weather, the umpire, the list goes on. If you can reduce some of those variables, you lower the implied variance that you're playing into. For instance, if you find you don't have time to work through all the variables in a baseball game, you could focus on just the first 5 innings, and then you'd be able to eliminate the bullpen. You could focus on just the first inning, and you can eliminate the 7, 8, 9 batters. You could focus on a player prop and eliminate pretty much everything except for the batter and the pitcher that they're going up against. If you see what I mean, you can shorten the game to go from a large, expansive handicapping down to more manageable, bite-sized problems to solve. So my initial title for this section was derivatives, but I didn't want to sidetrack what we're hoping to accomplish with the derivatives. We could spend an entire webcast talking about derivatives, and someday we probably will. Derivatives are no longer priced as just a half or a quarter of the game line. They are situational in nature. Understanding derivative pricing is a huge leap in the evolution of a sports bettor. So for now, let's just say that the reason a sports bettor would want to shorten the game is to narrow the focus of his handicapping. You want to be able to handicap with fewer variables, not more. If you find you're not able to necessarily shorten the game, then maybe you should attempt to shorten the schedule. I've cautioned before that it's really tough to effectively handicap more than one sport at a time. There's no shame in ignoring certain sports because you just don't have the time to get a handle on them. Likewise, there's no shame in committing to just one part of a season. Baseball is a long, grueling sport to wager on. It's also a sport that plays differently over the course of the season. And the best baseball handicappers I know stop betting baseball by the time summer starts. Their reasons for shortening the schedule might not be the same as yours, but if they're doing it, you should consider why. So back to derivatives though, taking the time to identify which derivatives would enable you to shorten the game might take a little extra effort on your part, but then again, it can pay off in the long run. Of course, be aware that limits are lower and tolerances are more shallow when you dip into the world of derivatives. And again, make sure that the derivatives you choose can be handicapped using less variables, not more. Personally, the sport I use derivatives on the most is baseball. It's also probably the most statistical of all the major US sports, which immediately lends itself to derivative markets. I started betting first innings because I found the data necessary made it a great use of my time. When that market got more efficient, I moved on to second innings and in-play betting. I automated most of this so that it got to the point where I'd have my scripts watch the game, and then they'd send me a text message between innings if there was a situation to bet on in the next inning. I no longer had to spend hours watching the games to identify an angle. It just got text messaged right to me. You can't complain about that. So there is a precaution when it comes to identifying derivatives though, and there's a tendency for people to overfit the data. Here's an example. You're an NHL bettor and you decide that instead of betting the full game, you're only going to wager on the first periods. You run the numbers and you find that certain teams are much more higher scoring in the first period than others that are extremely less scoring in the first period. You take that data and you use it as your basis for betting the first period. Unfortunately, you need to realize that in everything, there's going to be a distribution to the data. Just because a team has a great record in the first period doesn't belie their overall prediction. It could just be variance. So for whatever reason, many bettors seem to fall for small sample size conclusions when dealing with derivatives, more so than if they're dealing with the full game. Just make sure there's a valid hypothesis behind why a team would be different in a derivative than what you'd expect them to be in the full game. So the next tip enabling you to work smarter, not harder, is teamwork. So teamwork is building on a concept I introduced in our first webcast together, where I said that this downtime was a good chance to network with other people. This is a good application of that networking. If you can find like minds that are doing like things, then you can leverage that to work smarter. There's a quote there from a friend who is one of the top DFS players in the world, and I don't disagree with a word of it. Having a good teammate is an incredible way to boost your career while lessening your load. Here's a key point right up front about teamwork, though. It doesn't have to be about sharing the recipe to the secret sauce. Some of the best teamwork I do is with people where I'm just comparing my plays to theirs. Often this is done hours after the bets are made or even after the games are played. What I'm looking for are times when my plays correlate with their plays for uncorrelated reasons. Likewise, I want to know when they're on the opposite side of a game than me because maybe there's something there that I've missed. Teamwork can involve division of labor. Different people have different strengths. So for instance, let's take the 3 points we've already covered. If you had someone whose purpose was to look ahead and scout angles, he can provide value to someone who has the skill of automating tasks. And he can provide value to someone who identifies derivative plays. And sharing all that information together produces economies of scale that enable everyone on that team to work more efficiently. Personally, I'm a bit of a lone wolf for myself. I bet for myself. I develop my own angles, which I keep close to the vest. This enables me to keep 100% of my profits and work with a leaner overhead. However, I have numerous people that I'm in constant contact with, exchanging information and experience. There's no way I can expect to make a long-term profit if not for some level of information sharing between myself and other bettors. If I ever reach a point where I can no longer effectively lone wolf in this industry, having teammates will be invaluable to the art of getting money down. When you rely on a teammate, in any sense, you instantly have created a scale to your operation. If the market has more inefficiency than you're able to take advantage of, utilizing a trusted teammate is a great way to take advantage of that. So the final tip that ties this all together is a definite way to work smarter, not harder, and that is to outsource. So outsourcing is letting someone else handle the tasks that you don't have time to tackle. If your time is too valuable to you and you can explicitly explain what you're looking for to have done, outsourcing can be a huge boost. A very successful AP I know provided me with the quote there, which sums up his approach to a lot of things. If it's only $25 an hour to pay an expert to write some code, then he'd rather just let that expert do it and learn how to then learn how to do it himself. It's like paying a landscaper to make your yard look really good. You could definitely do that if you had the time, but perhaps it's not a task worth learning to you. So that's my friend Lee Jensen. He's on Twitter at Lee Jensen BJ. He's another good follow for anyone that's interested. But here's why I positioned this tip last, because it applies to everything we've covered so far. And you can outsource the task of looking ahead. You can outsource the task related to automation. You can outsource programming that would help you analyze derivative situations. You can outsource tasks that perhaps you haven't found a teammate to assist you with. Now, when I talk outsourcing, I'm talking about generally paying someone else to do the work for you. There are numerous services on the internet where freelancers bid to do the work that you've spec'd out. Here's the biggest caution, though. You're generally not hiring a sports bettor. You may not even be hiring someone who watches sports or has any idea about the sport you're looking at. They might not have even seen the sport that you're looking to get programming work done. You need to be able to be very clear about what you want done. If you want someone to code a program that will track a baseball game and let you know via text message when a scenario fits your criteria, such as the program I described earlier, you should have the ability to specify what language you want this program in, what information it needs to query, what algorithms it uses to apply the logic, what information it relays to you, what information the text message relays to you, how it contacts you, how frequently it checks, so on. You basically need to be able to write this program without actually writing this program. You're providing the programmer with all of the logic that they're going to need to code this. Don't expect to say you are comparing a pitcher's xFIP to a batter's WOBA and expect any freelancer to know what that even means, nor will they attempt to figure it out. There are a few different popular outsourcing sites. Upwork seems to be the most popular these days. Fiverr has gained some popularity because it can start as low as $5, but honestly, putting together an effective task is going to run much higher than that. I list Guru here because it has the fewest foreign freelancers of any of the popular services. You're more likely to get someone who is at least familiar with US sports on Guru than the others. Now, your mileage is definitely going to vary when you use these sites for your outsourcing work. Sometimes it's easier just to put a request out there into sports betting circles like Twitter, asking for someone who's willing to help out with a project. It's up to you and that person to discover a fair compensation scale for the two of you, but it's often an easier way to get past the barriers of being able to translate exactly what you're looking to accomplish with this work. So when you get to the point where you can effectively outsource, congratulations, you're well on your way. You probably already are starting to run an effective, efficient sports betting business, and hopefully you are working smarter and not harder. And let's recap some of the things we went over today. So first we talked about looking ahead, being able to look at the schedule and map out what you're going to be betting on, how you're going to be using your time. It's a very key resource to using your time more efficiently. Secondly, we talked about automation, and that is a key cornerstone of any sports betting, is to be able to automate tasks so that, again, you can make efficient use of your time. Then we talked about shortening the game, being able to narrow your focus and look for things that possibly require less time to handicap so that you can come up with better solutions that can make the betting go quicker. Then we talked about teamwork, being able to leverage other people's skills and other people's opinions to help sharpen your own, and again, use your time wisely. And then tying it all together, we talked about outsourcing so that you can, if need be, hire someone to take care of these tasks, which is the ultimate way of freeing up your time and using it more efficiently. So finally, there is one more piece of advice I received from a good friend that didn't necessarily fit into any of these other tips, but it was too good to leave out. And that's a quote here from Rufus. And he said, either be working or not working. So when you're working, you make it your sole focus to just be working. Don't try to work with the television on. Don't try to work with Twitter in the background. That's one I've had to learn. When you're working, be working. When you're not working, don't be working. Don't be thinking about work. Use that as the rest of your time. So it's a great point and probably the best way to work smarter and control the number of hours you spend at this. And it speaks also to finding that balance. We talked about it at the top of the hour. We talked about it in our first webcast together, but it's all a key component to being a better sports bettor. So in fact, I got such good tips this week from Rufus and Spanky and others that I've actually invited Rufus and Spanky to be on next week's webcast. So we're going to do something a little different. I think it's very neat, very original. Next Friday, there's going to be the three of us, Rufus, Spanky, and I, three professional bettors, all three of us on video. We're going to be talking about a variety of topics, taking a lot more questions from anyone that has them. And if you want to stop in and watch next Friday, I think it's going to be a good time. I've hung out with both of these guys. It's always a lot of fun. There's a lot of back and forth between us that it plays very well. So I look forward to that next week. So that does it for today's presentation. We're going to move in now into our Q&A section. If you are in the Zoom room, you can enter a question via the Q&A button. If you are on YouTube, you can put it into the chat box. It can be anything we talked about today, or some questions you may have on how this all ties together, or any other thing in the world of sports betting that you want to talk about here for the next few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and check out who we have so far. Okay, Brian has asked, do you think the art of line grinding is dying out as legalization expands? So Brian, I'm going to assume by line grinding, you mean, catching lines before they move. If you see a line move at a market-making book like Pinnacle, you grab the line at a slower book, maybe stateside. I'm assuming that's what you mean. If you don't mean that, then go ahead and throw another question in explaining it better, but I'll speak to this. Yes, I do think that line grinding or steam chasing or just looking for value on lines is a dying art. But I don't think it's because of legalization so much. I think it's because of services like Don Best. Everyone is no longer trying to make their own book. They're just copying what some other book is doing. They're writing scripts on the back end, and if the line moves at Pinnacle, they move, and then they add extra vig to it. It's pretty common these days to see it happen with a lot of these sports books. They're just copying each other. There's very little originality left. So it is tougher now to be a line grinder. However, what we've also seen since legalization started is a lot more companies are coming online and they're not using Don Best. They're off screen. So this sort of helps because often when you don't use Don Best, you're often not checking Don Best as well. Part of their arrangement when they sign up for the Don Best services, they get to use it because they give their information to it. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of the newer legal sites are not on Don Best, and sometimes you can catch them napping. But again, all markets tend towards efficiency, right? So the sports betting market is only going to become more efficient as well. And that's just how it is. That's how it's going to be. So I don't think it's so much a product of legalization as it's just a product of market efficiency. All right, so there's another question here on what are the best tools to use to get automation? Is there any certain program language that works better than others? That's a good question. So you don't need to program to do automation, but you might find that it is easier that way. If you're just starting out programming, a scripting language is better than some kind of deeper machine coding program language. And by scripting language, I mean something like Python or R, where you're basically just writing a script that can get followed. And sometimes you can basically add scripts together to then create a bigger, more robust program. So, I mean, I would recommend if you had to go the programming route, you would use Python probably. Web scraping is really easy with Python. There's a library called Beautiful Soup that's very popular. It helps you scrape a lot of different websites, and it's probably the best tool for gathering the data. And then your second step there is processing the data. So you dump it into some kind of data frame, and then you process it. In the past, I've used Python to gather data, and then I've used Excel to process it, just because it's a little more visual for me, and it helps me kind of visualize the data faster. You can do everything from, like, for instance, Major League Baseball has an API that's in XML format, when XML is just a basic markup language. And you can query that, and you can get live scores and information and stats as they happen in the game. It's what all of these in-game scoreboards are built from. You basically just scrape this data and you query it over and over again, and compile it, and you could produce your own scoreboard where they have the little people moving on the base and everything. Any kind of animations you want to add to it. But Major League Baseball is very good with that. Some of the other sports are not as good with that. The NBA is a tough one to scrape, and I'm just speaking from experience on those. But you can use those to help out with your automation. And, I think I mentioned in the first webcast, or maybe it was the second one, I forget which, GitHub. So anytime you're looking to do any of these automation tasks, get involved with programming, check GitHub first. There's probably going to be somebody on there who's done what you're trying to do, and they can help you out. So that's a good one. I have one other question here so far. So if you're looking to ask a question, now's the time to do it. We'll just end if there's no more questions after this one. The question is, what is the best way to acquire teammates? What red flags pop up often with acquiring teammates? So here's the thing: you don't need to get the deepest level of trust with someone just to use them as a source to use as a teammate. When I say teammate, I'm not talking about making a bond with somebody and sharing a bankroll or anything like that. You can just chat with somebody and talk to them, and find some similarities between you and them, and see if that's a good way that you and that person fit together to exchange information. And the information doesn't have to be, like I said, doesn't have to be the recipe to the secret sauce. It just has to be, things that you find of value to each other. So in instance, you could say, hey, I was just betting at William Hill, and I got limited down to $100 betting on baseball props. Well, now you know that, okay, William Hill will possibly limit you on baseball props. That's not news to anyone, I'm sure, but this is the sort of information you can share between people. It's a circle of information sharing. Now, when you get into deeper levels of trust and you start maybe sharing documents on Google, or you work on a project together, or if you find an angle and you share a bankroll, well, that's when you have to definitely be looking at this person and how they've performed so far as a bettor and as a teammate. I wouldn't dive into those circles of trust. I've heard too many people that have been scammed by people, or that get suckered into doing something and get left holding the bag. It's still a bunch of gamblers, and sometimes you can't really trust them. So keep that in mind. Wade into the river of trust slowly, okay? Don't dive in. And that's, I think, the best thing I can tell you to do. A couple more questions have shown up here. How do you know when a market becomes efficient? That's a good question, Brandon. Thank you for asking that. When you no longer win, right? I mean, that's kind of the short answer, but basically, as you chart yourself, as you compile your records, and you start to see that you no longer have the closing line value that you once had, or you no longer have even the results that you once had, that's when you start to say, this market may become more efficient. I'll use an example that I used earlier in the broadcast. First inning Major League Baseball lines. There was a time when Major League Baseball first innings were all priced with the no being the prohibitive favorite. Yes was always a plus number. Now, when baseball starts again, you'll see that yes is now usually the favorite. So think about that. They've become more efficient. It's very obvious to anyone who's bet them that, oh, I don't get the value here that I used to get. But that shows you like what some of the angles were back in the day, because the market was priced inefficiently. Somebody asked anonymously here, this content is great. Since it's free and you've made it clear you do not want to charge, is there a charity you would like us to donate to if we choose to? That's a very generous thing to say. I don't have any in mind. I mean, obviously there's plenty of charities right now that are in need of donations. My goal here with this channel and with this process is not so much monetization. I mean, even if I get to the point where I can throw a commercial at the start of this YouTube video, it's not going to make me a lot of money. Monetization is not at this point a real money grab for this content. It's just far too niche in terms of the audience. So this is just me kind of giving back and getting the content out there to people, because I think making more educated sports bettors actually helps me in the long run, because it gets more people betting, it gets them to last longer, it gets sports betting to become more sustainable. And in the end, that helps me because my sharp action blends in a little bit more. The sports books will have less to worry about. Whereas if everyone was betting and they lose and they get disgusted by it and never come back, I'm the only one left in the sports book and my action sticks out. So that's my goal here. That's my non-altruistic reason for this, is to help me in the long run be able to get a more sustainable sports betting product. I appreciate your thought about donating to a charity from this. But in the meantime, just stick with me, subscribe, tell your friends. I really appreciate it. It's neat to put these together and see where they go. How would you recommend identifying value on NFL draft props? Okay, so Ryan asked this. This is a good question, Ryan. I'm usually not a person that bets the NFL draft. In late April, I am usually heads down on baseball, as well as finishing up the basketball season. There's the two sports that I mainly bet, Major League Baseball and NBA. Early season Major League Baseball is usually a very good time for me, so I generally do not pay attention to the draft. This year I did. This year I watched various draft information things. I listened to all the pundits. I actually read Twitter about it, which is kind of scary. And I'm not sure I'm any smarter about it as a result. This year is different with the NFL. There's less workouts. There's less in-person testing of skills. And so we're going by a lot of what people say about somebody. That's a little bit scary, right? So I did bet some NFL draft props. But what I did is I just looked for value. I looked at the sharp books. and I looked at the square books and compared the lines and bet the ones that I could. I did this early on. It's probably been at least 2 weeks now since I made my last NFL draft prop. My bets still look pretty good, line value wise, but some have moved against me. I guess the consensus has moved in some cases. But here's the thing, the limits weren't too high with NFL draft props, so I wasn't going to spend too much time looking into it. So if I were somebody who wanted to look into the NFL draft and figure out ways to identify value, I would just compare books, sharp books to square books. And if you want to go deeper than that, then you can read the mock drafts and things like that. But understand, this is a abnormal year. This is one outside of the scope of how it's usually going to go when it comes to the NFL draft. So you're not going to learn any long-term skills related to this draft that you could use in the next draft, hopefully. A couple more questions here. Any recommendations for line making or understanding outcome probabilities? Just finished up the logic of sports betting and enjoyed the nitty gritty of it. Yeah, Xavier, that was his question here. And you're right, the logic of sports betting, if you enjoyed the nitty gritty of that, then there's a lot more for you to find and come about. So when you go about the basics of line making, there's a couple skills you need to probably get under your belt. Now, these aren't going to allow you to, in 30 minutes, be able to become an effective line maker, but you should Google the terms ELO. ELO models are a way that a lot of people use to make lines, and they're kind of the most basic of models. Basically, they're just comparing if one team wins and one team loses, and no matter what the margin was, then there's a strength of schedule, or a strength of power there with those teams, and you can easily model out any league based on ELO models. It's pretty simple to understand. It's actually more simple than making it sound. But I would go ahead and start and try to make it your own ELO model. There's always ones out there you can compare yourself to, and start from there. And if you want to go into that modeling and making your own lines, that's probably the best place to start. I hope to do some videos on kind of basic modeling. Since we have guests next week, I might have more time to do it. I might throw together a pre-recorded video that is, the basics of modeling. We'll see if it happens. It's a little daunting to do a pre-recorded one where I'm doing screen captures and all this stuff, but I've got nothing but time right now. Okay, and the last question I have here, and if I don't get any more, then, oh wait, another one popped in. So sorry, we'll just keep going here. When you talk about a network, are you referring to other bettors for exchanging picks and info? For example, Rufus likes a side and told you about it. Do you play it? I generally don't take other people's advice on what to play. Like I don't exchange picks. I like to see what they're on if they're betting the same sport as me, because I like to compare it to myself, but I don't necessarily follow anyone else's picks. But information is key. So now if I was talking to Rufus, now Rufus and I don't really bet the same sports, but if we were, let's use an example. If Rufus told me that he liked a side of a game, generally I'm not going to ask him why, but if he wants to volunteer that information, I would gladly listen. And then I would see if I like independently that same side. I don't want it to influence my thought, but I also want to be able to test myself against it. And that's just how I work. You don't have to work that way. If you wanted to get a group of people together and all just make picks with each other, that's fine. I just find that really inefficient, because picks are like, that old saying of like, you can give a man a fish and he's, not hungry for a day. You can teach a man to fish and he's never hungry a day in the rest of his life. I may have butchered that, but the point being is I want to find the process behind it. I don't want to just take your pick and go bet it. And chances are I'm probably not going to get as good a line as you got, especially if you're someone like Rufus, who's definitely going to move the market on anything he plays. I kind of want to learn how to do it myself. So, maybe someday I'm beating Rufus to those games. So that's just the way I work about it. But when I talk about network, I'm talking about more exchanging information more than exchanging picks. All right. So Chadwick says, I've noticed as I listen to podcasts, Periscopes, YouTube, etc., that I'm drinking from a fire hose. Any recommendations on sorting all this information? Yeah, that's a good point, Chadwick. I go through times where I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose, and I kind of have been doing this for a long time. So I can't say it's going to stop. Um, it's unfortunate, but sometimes you are going to take in a lot of information, and you need to decide what information you're going to absorb and what information is just going to blow by you. I found a lot of times I listen to podcasts at 1.5x or 2x speed, just kind of speed them up and process the information faster. It's really tough. I don't have a good answer for you, Chad. I wish I did. But you just have to basically pick and choose and find what the good information is and what the stuff that you can forget about. Have you built a network? This is another anonymous question. Have you built a network of other bettors to check with first and cross picks to avoid juice? Okay, so like cross betting with each other. Well, no, I haven't done that. That we want to do that. Then you get to have to exchange money back and forth and things like that. I don't have any problem getting outs, finding outs, using outs. But if I did, that could be a possibility. But really, that only works for like major markets, and you have to agree on the price and the line. And there's a section in the book Guys and Dolls where somebody says, eventually someone's going to tell you that the Jack of Spades is going to jump out of this deck of cards and shoot cider at you. And if they do that, you're going to say, there's no way that'll ever happen. So I'll bet any money against that. Well, you can be sure as heck that you're going to end up with an earful of cider if that happens. Another quote I butchered. But the point being is, if somebody smart, likes another side, that's more reason for you not to want to bet the side you like, rather than to want to, game up and take their wager. So that's kind of how I've always approached it. And a lot of the people that I network with, if they like the other side, then I'm actually looking at it twice and trying to figure out, what did I miss? Do you have any opinion? This is Brian asking this. Do you have any opinion on Major League Baseball's idea to hold games only in Florida or Arizona? And how would that affect betting on baseball? Yeah, we all saw that earlier this week. I'm not sure what the deal with that was, why they were bringing that up, because it seemed totally crazy. They would all gather the teams in Arizona, and they'd play the games out there. I saw that the East Coast teams would play at 10 a.m. West Coast time. So those games would be in the afternoon in the East Coast. The West Coast teams would play starting at 8 p.m. at night. So when it's a little cooler out there, to get away from the heat of the afternoon sun in Arizona. It just seems like it's a desperate grab, and I'm not sure how the logistics of any of this would work. Hey, I would love to have sports back. I would love to be able to bet on real sports as much as anyone, but I just don't see how a lot of these sequestering, isolating, options they've laid out are ever going to work. So for the time being, we'll just have to go with it. One thing I do want to bring up, and I brought this up on a podcast I did the other day, is you should be thinking about situations where, shortened seasons, how it would affect certain sports. Case in point, the NFL. The NFL still seems like they think they can start on time in September, maybe without people in the stands, but they can start on time with the regular season. But it's very unlikely that they can do a full preseason. We've already canceled some OTAs. The draft is altered. So it's going to be very hard for teams that are doing a preseason under either a new coach, a new offensive scheme, a new defensive scheme, a new quarterback. That's going to be all very tough on those teams. So that's a good angle to look at now and be ready for down the line. The example that was on the podcast I did the other day was the NFC East. So there's only one team in the NFC East that has the same coach as last year. That's going to be a big impact The team that does have the same coach is the Philadelphia Eagles. The other 3 teams have new coaches, new schemes. So the NFC East is one to check, but I think everyone kind of has realized that by now. So that, that's something to look at when sports resume. Would there ever be an advantage, Jerry asked this, would there ever be an advantage for you betting from UK or Ireland where betting income is tax-free? Well, sure, Jerry, yeah, it totally would be. Canada as well. If you're not a professional or you don't claim to be a professional, gambling income is tax-free in Canada as well. Yeah, the US tax system with gambling is really bad. I will be doing a video on that at some point. I'll be talking about, the tax advantages of being a professional gambler like myself. In my instance, I can write off a lot of what I do, my expenses. I have a huge allotment that I can put towards retirement savings, IRAs. Basically the average worker can put like 4%. A sole proprietor, someone who files a Schedule C like myself, I can do 25% of my income goes into IRA funds, which is very useful right now to get money in while the market's low. There are very, all my expenses can be covered in terms of write-offs against my gambling income. So there are different things that a professional bettor uses, but sure, I'd love to be tax-free. I don't even want to imagine how much I've paid in taxes over the past decade and a half. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for depressing me, Jerry. But the point being is, would I ever want to move over there or set up shop over there? I don't know if I can go that far with it. I'd still be an American. I'd still be subject to tax laws, even though I was spending part of my year over there. And for visa concerns, I couldn't spend more than 6 months over there anyway. So it would have to be some of a company setup. Now you're getting very complicated. So I don't think it's anything I'll ever look into, but maybe another syndicate that is more complex in their organization than I am could possibly look into that, sure. Okay, so I think we've reached the end of our questions and we've just about reached the end of our hour. So I would like to thank you all for attending. Keep in mind, next week, we're gonna have Rufus, Spanky, and myself. I think that's gonna be really fun. It's gonna be a lot more entertaining than just me talking at you. Those guys are really great. And I think it's gonna be a good one. So be sure to get in here early next week. The Zoom room, I'm sure, is gonna fill up next week. And thank you for attending this one, and I'll talk to you next time.